Tower of Madness. This is a game that I picked up at Gen Con 2018 after it caught my eye when I saw it set up on a table because of this really impressive component here. This Kerplunk type tower, but with a Lovecraftian theme. You pull tentacles and, well, you see what happens. And I thought, oh well, if that is all that there is, I probably still would like to give it a try and add it to my collection because I'm such a sucker for all things Lovecraft. I own a dice tower that has an Elder Sign and other Lovecraft-inspired art, and it works like a normal dice tower. It doesn't open portals to other dimensions, it doesn't summon shoggoths or stuff like that. And so I thought, okay, just, I don't know, a toy basically with a different theme. I'm gonna be fine with that. Turns out that actually there is a game in here that the designer wanted also to have an actual game that surrounded that tower, a game of which that tower was only one of the components. In fact, the game is basically a dice game with some similarities with games such as Elder Sign, and you use the tower to determine random events and to assign penalties. I like the fact that the game may go in very different directions, and so the investigators, everybody plays as an investigator at the beginning of the game. The game is cooperative in that sense. The investigators wants to stop Cthulhu, but actually only one of them will win if Cthulhu is stopped. However, players may also go insane, and in which case the victory conditions change for the insane people because they may, but not necessarily, they may win if Cthulhu awakens. There's also a situation in which everybody loses, and I like that nihilistic aspect that really is resonant with Lovecraft. So definitely this is a game that has this like gimmicky component. It looks gimmicky, and probably it's also a bit gimmicky, but they try to have a legitimate game paired with it. The question, of course, is that did they succeed to do so? We'll answer that in the conclusions of this video, but before we get there, let's take a closer look at the game. Clearly the centerpiece of the game, and what actually even gives the game its name, is the Tower of Madness, this tower here. At the beginning of the game you will place those plastic tentacles in it, and then you fill the tower with marbles. So they're placed in there. Then you kind of shuffle the tower a little bit so that the marbles settle in various areas of the tower and are ready to fall when the tentacles are removed. Those marbles have different colors, and different colors of marbles do different things. Red marbles drive you crazy, blue marbles are discoveries that will give you points, white marbles are spells, and there are several green marbles that represent Cthulhu waking up gradually. If 3 of those marbles fall from the tower, Cthulhu wakes up and destroys the world, which is not necessarily a bad thing, depending on which side of the insanity divide you are on. Players represent investigators, and all investigators start as sane, which may change during the game. You may play the standard game in which each player has a card such as this one with different characters but all with the same ability, which we will explain, or you can play with other characters that have variable abilities. We have spell cards and natural influence tiles. They will give you special abilities and ways of doing special actions. I'll tell you later how you get them and how you can use them. But most importantly, each player has a board such as this one, which you use to keep track of how you're doing in the current turn, and also how well you have been doing and how many marbles you have collected. The game, in essence, despite how massively important the tower is, the game in essence is a dice game. You have these dice here with numbers from 1 to 6 and different symbols that are Lovecraftian inspired. Players will alternate taking turns. When it is your turn, you roll all of your 5 dice, then you need to lock at least 1 to your board, but you can lock more than 1, and you can then re-roll. And you re-roll until you have locked all of your dice, until either because you have decided to do so or because you have been forced to do so by, well, rolling the last unlocked die. What you're trying to do each round is to complete the investigation. To complete the investigation, you need to roll these numbers, basically a 1, a 2, and a 3. Each round, that is the requirement to complete the investigation. Then here you have an area where you place your discovery dice. And here, for example, I decide to lock this die here and to re-roll this one, because the number you have in the discovery area, you want it to be as high as possible. So I complete the investigation. Hooray! If I am the first player to complete an investigation in a round, I use this yellow ball to mark the total that I scored. In this case, I scored 7 points. And the next player will continue, will do the same. We'll do the same, and so on and so forth. And we'll see later what happens if you do not complete your investigation. The game uses a deck of location cards. Only a number of them are used every game. You shuffle them, and again, the size depends on the number of players. And each turn, the players will be fighting for the location that is currently face up. Each location also has different abilities or different circumstances that will apply and that will change the game in some way, adding variety from round to round. And here you have a number which represents the number of victory points scored by the player that gains that card. So players will alternate, again, they will go one after the other, trying to complete their mission, to complete the investigation and to score as high as possible. If a player, after the first player that completed an investigation, also completes the investigation, and does so with a score which is equal to or higher than the previous highest player, then the player becomes the new lead investigator. Basically, if another investigator now, they say, completes the investigation and scores 9 points here, they will take this marble from me and they will place it in the 9 slot of their board. Now the player then later completes the investigation and scores a 12. And that's how it works. At the end of the round, after everybody has gone, the player that has the marble on their board gets to take the tile, the location for the current round. They add it to their personal area, and you flip the next one, and you flip the next location face up and now. Read the rules, and that is the location that we are fighting for. So far so good, right? Pretty simple. But what happens if you don't complete the investigation? That is, if you're unable, or well, maybe unwilling, yes, unwilling to complete the investigation, you don't log those 3 results, in which case you had to draw a tentacles from the tower. And there are also other game effects that may force you to draw a tentacle or allow you, because again, sometimes you want to draw a tentacle. The tentacle may do nothing or may cause some marbles to fall. Well, here's a case of a tentacle that doesn't do anything. The tentacle did something. A white and a blue marble fell. And when marbles fall, you add them to your personal area. Discoveries are worth 3 points at the end of the game, 3 points each. White marbles, which are spells, will allow me to draw a spell card, which I can use later in the game. Cards have a sane and insane side. All investigators start as sane, but if you acquire 4 red marbles that fall from the tower, from red marbles, fall from the tower, or there are game effects that give you those marbles, maybe the players are going to put them on your board, well, in which case you become insane, and then all that you're trying to do during your turn is to play spell cards and to pull tentacles. In fact, during your main turn, you don't try to complete the investigation anymore. As your main turn, you draw tentacles. Oh, more discoveries and spell, although if I'm insane, discoveries are not... Oh no, those 2 discoveries. Discoveries are not that important anymore. Oh, I heard stuff moving. A Cthulhu marble, and if I am insane, that is very good for me. And again, so just you see how it works. As for end game conditions, the game may end in one of different ways. If all of the locations are allocated before Cthulhu wakes up, which happens if 3 of those marbles are fall from the tower. So if players go through all of the locations are allocated, the player is going to go complete the main investigation before the end of the game. Then the player with the highest total victory points, the same player with the highest total victory points, wins the game. And victory points are scored by adding the total that you have on your locations plus 3 points for each discovery marble. So Cthulhu doesn't awaken, the sane investigator with the highest total wins the game. If 3 green marbles fall from the tower, the world is destroyed. All of the lead investigators, all of the sane investigators lose the game. As for the insane player, if the marble fell because it was an insane player that actually did it, that insane player wins the game. Heck, that insane player becomes the harbinger of destruction, the main cultist that made it happen. And sometimes, as you can see, there can be a massive fall of marbles. If, however, the world ends because someone who is not an insane player pulls the tentacle that causes Cthulhu to awaken, well, then too bad. Everybody loses. The investigators, the sane investigators lose because the world is destroyed, and the insane people lose because they weren't the ones that made it happen. This is how you play Tower of Madness. So, I played the game with adult friends and it didn't go all that well. Everybody was pretty much underwhelmed. It is possible that it was because we were playing it very safe. Pretty much everybody was just going for the obvious strategy, which is make sure that you lock the dice to complete your investigation and then try to roll as high as possible on the other 2 dice. And really, if you use that strategy consistently, you're gonna lock dice most of the time. You're gonna pass your test most of the times. Which really means that at this point, maybe the game could be simplified like, why don't we roll 2d6s and see who gets the closest to 12. Yes, you have some decisions here and there. Maybe I locked a 1 and a 3, and all the other dice, I have a 6 there. Now I could choose to reroll all those dice, including the 6, to increase my chances of getting a 2, locking the dice, but then I may have lower values in the dice that I'm actually scoring, or I can choose to also lock the 6 and I have fewer dice to complete the investigation. But this is pretty much the only quote-unquote tough decision that you have. In most cases, you cannot do anything because you reroll and you just stupid rolls, and that happens, it's fine, it's a dice game. Or might happen to see you roll at the beginning and you get the dice that you need to lock the investigation, to complete the investigation, and then you roll a 12 or an 11, and your turn is over right there. At a certain point, some players started messing up on purpose because I wanted to see what happened with the tower, and actually a couple of turns I was just pulling tentacles like a maniac, which is appropriate, and nothing was happening. So it was very underwhelming, very anticlimactic. Then a player messed up one thing, pulled a tentacle, half of the marbles came down, and the game was pretty much over then. Yes, you have randomness with the tower, you know that. Yes, you have randomness with the dice, you know that. But I just don't feel that these 2 elements really go together in any way. And just the randomness is massive, it's total, it's complete with the tower, there's no strategizing there. In a sense it is Lovecraftian, but really in game terms also feels kind of disappointing. And as for the dice part, the strategy is just so incredibly blatantly obvious. Another problem is, if somebody does get some really good rolls at the beginning of the game, and they say acquire 3 locations, they just got a lucky opening, then you have a runaway leader problem. Yes, you may try to get insane at that point, thinking I'm never gonna win by using the locations because there's no way I'm gonna get enough points to catch up with that player. Then I'm gonna go crazy. But again, at that point, it's such a blind thing. I just choose to pull tentacles, and even if I win, it's really anticlimactic. So all of my friends were like, ah, this is just doesn't feel much like a game. It does feel like a gimmicky component with this other mini game attached to it. Then my daughters saw the game around the house, became curious. They're 8 and 6, and I played it with them. I was like, what the heck? Yeah, the art is a little inappropriate, probably. There are some cards that are a little like dark and disturbing. For me, not for my 6-year-old that loved them. And then I had a big surprise. Turns out that my 6 and 8-year-old really like this game. They like it a lot. Interesting enough, both the 8 and the 6-year-old, they figured out the same strategy that the adults were using. Lock the dice, save the other 2 dice, unless you roll the 6, maybe you lock it, risking not to complete the investigation. Which also tells me if a 6-year-old can figure out the best strategy an adult can figure out, that's, I guess, pretty much all the design has to offer. I don't think we're missing much, or on the other hand, it means that the game really is so basic. There's that one decision that you can make that is relevant. A 6-year-old can figure it out. Which, however, to them was a great source of pride. Like, whoa, I figured it out. Whoa. They were really happy, really excited when those marbles come out, and half of the marbles came out in one round. People were jumping around the room, extremely happy, extremely excited. So alas, there is this strange surprise. It looks like a mature version of Kerplunk for players of Arkham Horror that maybe want to take a break from the big game. Maybe an alternative to Other Sign, but it ain't. In truth, it is a game that children will appreciate much more than adults, at least in my experience. That happens to have a strange adult theme. Now, if you don't mind having your kids playing with this theme, I saw my kids have a blast. They really, really like it. Tomorrow is Labor Day, they don't go to school. They already told me, we want to play Tower of Madness, and I will comply gladly because it's fun to see them play this game. What a surprise, it turns out to be mainly a children game, and I'll just have fun seeing them having fun. As for me, there are just many other games that I feel I would like to play rather than this one. Better dice game, better Lovecraftian games. This one is just, again, it's a cute gimmick, but the dice game is completely bland. It really doesn't have enough to hold my interest. There aren't many other things that you can do that really elevate the strategy, give it more depth. It is, take those obvious choices when you roll the dice, if the die roll gives you any relevant choice at all, and see what happens when you pull the tentacles. Tower of Madness, the most inappropriate game for children that I've ever reviewed. Also probably the first game for children that I reviewed that I didn't know was gonna be a game for children before I played it, but that's how I categorize it. A game for children who have adults that don't mind a little bit of strange, disturbing imagery on the components. And that's pretty much my assessment of Tower of Madness. The 6-year-old loved it.